Welcome to part 4 of my educational long-range hunting series, and today we're going to be talking about projectile choice. Projectile choice is an important topic. Another word for your choice of projectile is your terminal ballistics. So we've talked about your internal ballistics with your cartridges and your calibers. We've talked about your external ballistics, so basically, the flight path of your bullet to get to your intended target or game. And now we need to talk about terminal ballistics, which is more or less the choice of your projectile. So straight off the back, I've got here my two favorite projectiles. So one of them with the aluminium tip there is the Hornady A-tip, and the other one there is the ELD match. Those are my two favorite long-range projectiles. You'll probably notice that both of those are target bullets. The ELD X is also a very good bullet projectile, but I don't use it. Mainly because when I'm hand loading, I want to squeeze as much pressure out of that particular chambering that I am hand loading for. And the ELD X just runs a little bit higher pressure than the ELD match, so you end up with a slightly slower load. Anyway, into the video. So there are my two favorite projectiles that I prefer to use. Now I prefer to use those in a very particular application, and I will admit they are not perfect. Every projectile will have its strengths and weaknesses. It's a tricky balance between animal game weights and velocity, and there's a whole lot of factors that come into it that I think we need to cover off in this topic when we're talking about terminal ballistics, performance of how a projectile works on your intended animal. So I'm going to go through, for a start, what our goal is when we choose a particular projectile to use at extended hunting ranges. And our goal is that we want a high ballistic coefficient, preferably a heavy projectile that expands consistently and punches deep through the animal. And if it comes out the other side, that's slightly better again, because then we create what we call our blood trail, which assists us in actually finding that particular animal. So there's many different types of projectiles out there. You've got full metal jacket projectiles, there's homogeneous copper projectiles, solid copper projectiles, there's target projectiles, there are bonded projectiles, and then there's non-bonded projectiles. Then you've got like ballistic tip projectiles, hollow point projectiles, there's H-jacket bonded, H-jacket non-bonded, there's fully frangible projectiles. There's so many different kind of projectiles out there. What most guys, I think, do is they just look for a particular projectile. Well, now if it's in stock, which is the hard part, but they look for a particular projectile, they just look at the BC and they just choose that. And that's not really going to cut it. So choosing a particular projectile for the purpose of what you're hunting is quite important. So I'm just going to go over to my two favorite projectiles, and I'll go over my number one favorite first. And I'll go over the strength of this projectile that I have observed and measured. And then I'll go over the weakness of this projectile that I have observed and measured. So this particular projectile here, that is a 208 grain 30 cal ELDM. This projectile is absolutely lethal, down to what I've sort of measured, down to about 1400 feet per second. It always has expanded consistently, and I have found wound channels produced by this particular projectile to be very wide. In fact, a lot wider than 1.5 times the projectile diameter, and that's even getting down low. Now, one of the weaknesses with this projectile is it is quite soft And I would call this not quite a fully frangible projectile, but I would say it does not retain a lot of its weight. So the way this projectile will work, it is a target projectile, is it'll come into the animal, and within the first inch of it, doesn't matter what animal, doesn't matter the depths of the chest cavity of the animal, it doesn't matter if it hits skin or rib, whatever, within the first inch, this projectile is fully expanded and already starting to send pieces of lead and copper through the animal. And on the other end, when they exit, they create a massive wound channel. And so I found this a very, very high trauma projectile, and it expands very well. Where I have not noticed that this doesn't do well is when I loaded this out of a 300 rum, and I was in close. So they were going very fast, and they tended to be a little too soft and close, so they flew to bits. Another area where they don't seem to do all that well is when they're in close again and you strike bone. They tend to just go, you end up with 3 different exit wounds. But basically my rule of thumb with the ELD match is what I've measured and observed, which I just think is science. This is not my opinion. This is from the animals that I have killed with these. Is that bullet, as long as it's going under 2,700 feet per second, it performs very, very well. So that is one of the reasons why I use a larger, heavier bullet, to keep that speed down. And I find that works great. Another projectile that I really like, which is my second favorite. This is a 153 grain A-tip in the 6.5 millimeter. And I haven't killed a lot of animals with these compared to the ELD match. But from the animals that I have killed, I think that is a softer, more frangible projectile. And I'm going to say it's a fully frangible projectile. I think the whole projectile comes apart and dumps that energy into the animal. And I've noticed that these are very, very soft. So I shot my stag with this very bullet. This is my 9-point stag in the raw this year. With this very bullet, I shot it in the neck on purpose at 12 yards. This was doing 2,960 out of my 6.5 PRC, and it did not exit from the neck. And this is what they will do, these very, very soft projectiles. And I have killed 2 goats with my 284 Winchester using the 166 A-tip in a 7 millimeter, and got good, really, really like perfect wound channels on a small kid. Actually, I'll pop that video up there. And I also got a delayed kill on a nanny goat that I shot with this as well. And so that made me a little bit like, I believe these need to be placed very, very well in the kill zone of the animal, because they are very, very soft. Those 2 shots were at, I believe it was 550 yards, so not that far. But still, out of my 284, these are running at about 2,880 feet per second, a 166. I just shot a pig as well in my last video, and that was with the 166. And that pig, I shot that in the neck because I knew it was boar, and I knew that this projectile would probably not like having to punch through the shield of a boar. The ELD match would be fine. They're a little bit tougher, but to be honest, if I was shooting boars all the time, I'd probably prefer a bonded bullet. And that would be limiting shooting boars a lot closer. But so I shot at the neck, and it absolutely made a mess. It worked very, very well, and the exit, it didn't really have an entry or an exit. It just kind of more ripped the base of the neck out of the pig. So it worked really well. The spiker as well that I shot with this, that was in close, and I shot that in the chest, a quartering away shot, and again, I think it was too soft. It was about 160 yards, so not very far at all. and it did not perform all that well because I believe it's too soft. Anyway, those are my two favorite bullets. You're probably thinking, why do you use them? Well, because I'll go through why I use them, and after we talk about the different projectiles, I'm going to lump them into some categories, and I'm going to talk about some categories that I think have limitations, and then also talk about this category, the target fully frangible bullet, and why I prefer to use those particular projectiles. Okay, so let's talk about a few projectiles that are bonded. So a bonded projectile, which is a fairly common projectile, basically the lead in the projectile is actually bonded to the copper. And so that projectile is designed to retain as much weight as it travels through the animal as possible. I think a bonded projectile personally should not be used below 2,000 feet per second, because that projectile doesn't dump anything outside. It doesn't dump any petals, it doesn't dump any copper or lead outside of the wound channel at all. So basically, as that projectile will only mushroom, a bonded projectile will only mushroom as big as the caliber. It'll mushroom out. So you don't get any peripheral damage being caused, which I think is slightly problematic. Bonded projectiles are perfectly fine within 400 or 500 yards, depending on the cartridge you're using. They must be going fast, real fast. The faster the better. Some of your examples of a bonded projectile is your Nosler AccuBond, your Nosler AccuBond LR, your Federal Trophy, your Interbond is another bonded projectile, and personally one of my favorite bonded projectiles is the Swift Scirocco 2, which I find it's a very tough projectile. What you'll find with a bonded projectile is, if you are wanting to save your meat and things like that, they're a great projectile to go for. I would say most of your hunting projectiles are bonded, but they have their limitations. They can only expand they can only expand because everything's tied up with the bullet. It's all bonded together. So you basically will get a bullet that, yes, they tend to drive through, but they tend to punch smaller holes as that velocity gets lower. So I would say if you want to run a bonded projectile because you don't like the sound of a projectile that flies to bits, I would say that you want to probably run that in a Magnum, and you want to run them fast, which is going to limit how far out you can use them. Some of them will advertise, they go down to 1800 feet per second, but in a 7mm, you're really only going to be drilling a 10mm hole, which is not really what you want, especially at an extended range where your BC is not quite as good and you've got wind. And if you're going to be drilling a small little hole, it's not really the best option, I think. One that I'm not even going to touch on is the homogeneous solid copper bullets, like your Barnes. I believe Nosler do a solid copper as well. Those bullets, I call them the green bullets. They were invented so that we wouldn't be shooting lead out on the planet, saving the planet. They've had problems with overpressure on those projectiles. They tend to be quite long, so they say, you need to drop your projectile weights down, which I don't think is a good idea. They tend to drive nice and straight because they have a high sectional density, but a very low ballistic coefficient. And even though some of those manufacturers are starting to try and, you've got the E-tip and the TTSX, or the long range TSX, or the Barnes one, even though they're trying to sort of market themselves as a long range bullet, they really don't have what a long range projectile needs to do for us out at 600 or 700 yards. yes, you can do it, but I do think there's better options on the market that are also more affordable. I would say unless you're in a lead-free state, or you're in a lead-free like European country where you have to use them, then yeah. And I really hope politically that those who are trying to push this lead-free rubbish and projectiles are actually quite clearly, I think they really need to understand that when we start using these type of projectiles, there will be less humane kills. So you're kind of trying to save the planet, but you're also kind of trying to harm it at the same time, because we've got much better options in projectiles that contain lead to actually get the job done. So it's a bit of a catch-22. You kind of shoot yourself in the foot there, don't you? So they're your bonded bullets that I've just kind of touched on. A lot of the bullets that we're using are bonded, and I do believe they are limited. I do really believe they are limited. Okay, so you've got bonded, you've got H-frame bonded, which basically is like where a projectile is shaped like this, and then it will have a little H in here, so it has, a piece of lead in here, and it's only meant to expand to there. That's an H-frame, H-jacket bonded bullet. Same thing, these ones I think are even worse because they're actually longer, so therefore they basically build higher pressure, so you can't load them as fast. So I don't really like those bullets at all. It's like a controlled expanding bullet. I don't think they're that great at all, and I have had experience with them as well. So a non-bonded bullet, some of your non-bonded bullets is your Sierra Game King, your Sierra Pro Hunter. You got your Nosler Ballistic Tip, which is a good bullet. Your Nosler Petition, and your ELDX is a non-bonded bullet. And I think the non-bonded bullet is a good go-between between bonded and match. If you were kind of thinking, I want to drive something really, really fast, and I don't really want to hunt outside 400 or 500 yards, then your non-bonded bullets are really, really great. So when I say non-bonded, what I mean is that the lead inside the projectile is not actually bonded to the side of the bullet all the way, or it'll be loosely bonded. It's not going to be like mashed in with the copper jacket like a bonded bullet. So basically what it's designed to do is actually drop a certain percentage of its weight, which is I believe is a good thing, because we want to hit that animal and we want to dump as much energy inside that chest cavity, get our expansion, which is kind of important too, and preferably exit. So the non-bonded bullets are a good option for that. The non-bonded bullets will also be a better all-round bullet, because when they're in close in the bush and like 50 yards and things like that, they're still going to behave like a bonded bullet, but they will expand rapidly. They'll exit with a good amount of energy. They'll dump the energy into the animal. I have tested the 212 ELDX. I did some low loads through a 308, and I tested them down to like 1600 feet per second, and they were still expanding okay, but really those sort of velocities, even your non-bonded bullets, your wound channels are really starting to get narrower and narrower. And again, I think your non-bonded bullets, I wouldn't really shoot an animal under 1800 feet per second with a non-bonded bullet. And I'm sort of talking like 7mm, 30 caliber, things like that. So your bonded, I wouldn't go below 2000 feet per second, because your impact velocity doesn't have the ability really to open that bullet up nicely, and it's all you're relying on is how much that bullet opens up. Your non-bonded bullets like your ELDX and your Sierra Pro Hunter and those things, and there's heaps of them, I've only just listed a few. I would say they're around 1800 feet per second, and that's where they would kind of cut off. Your wound channels getting quite little again. So that brings me to a fully frangible bullet, or it's a target bullet. And so I do think there are target bullets out there that do not work consistently. This year, Match King is known to be one of those. But all your Berger target bullets don't work consistently either. And it's the way the front of the projectile is designed, basically. So when we're talking about target bullets, the ELD Match, which is the old AMAX, the new AMAX, that has a very good reputation for expanding right down to about 1400 feet per second. And I have experienced it. I've actually gone down to 1100 feet per second and they still work really well. So that's not even supersonic anymore. Your Berger VLD is, I would say your cutoff for those is like 1600 feet per second, but they're still expanding quite well and creating good wide wound channels, because basically, I'll go to the whiteboard again. Basically, the way, like, if you take a non-bonded bullet, and here's your chest on your animal here, a non-bonded bullet will tend to enter, and it will mushroom like that. And so that mushroom, dumps quite a lot of energy through here, and then as it goes out, the channel gets smaller until it exits. What I've found with the target bullets is, and this is probably another controversial topic, because this is why I say within 700 yards, long range hunting with 0 to 700 yards, I think as you get your target bullets that go past 700 yards and things like that, they stop exiting. So basically your target bullet will still expand here, and they tend to just, instead of mushrooming out like that, they actually tend to fragment. And they basically, this is pretty much what happens, they create multiple wound channels within the animal. And this is one of the reasons why I believe the target bullets are better, because yes, you still get a core that comes and exits, but mainly that most of your damage is being done inside the chest cavity of the animal, and you're creating multiple wound channels that take soft tissue and take out a lot of those vitals and things like that. So that's, look, I guess you can say, like, it's not designed for that. It's not, these target bullets are not designed for this, but the principles are identical to the Berger VLD. And Berger have stood on that bullet for so long that basically the way the ELD Match behaves is identical to a Berger VLD. Now, you don't get a beautiful mushroom or these lovely petals that peel back off, like a banana, off your projectile. And so for, like, marketing wise, it doesn't look that great when you retrieve even an ELDX or you retrieve an ELD Match. It's just a mess. But I think that's perfect, because basically you've sent fragments of projectile through the animal, and you'll create a massive wound channel through the animal, which is really what we were wanting to achieve with there. So my preference is the ELD Match. Now, they are so incredibly hard to get hold of. They have a very, very high ballistic coefficient, and they have a great reputation for dumping a lot of energy because of that high ballistic coefficient, because they travel along so efficiently. They dump that energy, they kick the wind, they're super accurate, like they're not like your Nozzle Acupond LR, they're not like a lot of those tricky kind of bonded H-jacket bullets, which are real finicky on seating depth and things like that. And so that's what I've found, and shot many, many, many animals with them, and just found that they are just a tough bullet that, they're stout enough, they expand well, and they just work. So my personal advice to you is, if you want to hunt at slightly less distances, you don't like the idea of using a target bullet in close, then I would suggest I would look at an ELDX or a Swift Scirocco. Those two bullets. The SST is also a fantastic bullet. Those projectiles will work very, very well in close. If you're going to start stretching the legs and start, you're wanting to start taking animals out at distances, my thinking is, look, if I'm at 200 yards and I shoot a soft bullet, I've got enough energy and hydraulic and hydrostatic shock anyway to get that animal down. So I'm okay with shooting a soft bullet, a heavy, soft target bullet. I would just shoot the Berger VLD or the ELDM by Hornady. They've two fantastic options right there. If you are shooting a cartridge that is a little slow, and you really, really want to make sure you're maximizing your kills on the other end, way down 600-700 yards, the A-tip is a good projectile for that choice. Just make sure it's not going too fast. So that's what I would say, just not too fast. Otherwise they tend to just hit the animal, they just fly to pieces. If you're going to be shooting deer and things where there's no cape, or there is no shield, I would say those three projectiles, Berger, ELDM, or the A-tip, are going to be just great. If you know that you're going to be shooting like boars and tar, which also have a shield and a cape, I'm a little nervous taking my 7mm 166 A-tips in my 284 Winchester down south next year. So I'm actually building a 300 Winchester Magnum, and I'm going to be shooting the 225 ELD match out of that to punch through the chest of those tar, mainly because I know at those extended distances I'm not going to be going all that fast anymore, and it should work really, really well. I know the 7mm with the 180 ELDM would be good, but I can't get hold of any, and I'm not paying double for some greedy guy on the internet who's back ordered them and then selling them second, or selling them off. I'm not doing that. I just refuse that. I hate that sort of thing. So that's what I will be doing, and we'll see how that goes. But anyway, that's my video on projectiles choice. I know that it's controversial, and I will just say that I think in New Zealand we have an advantage over the US, where we can actually shoot a lot more animals all year round, because we don't have 4 weeks of the year to go hunting. And so I think that's a great advantage for us in New Zealand, that we can actually test projectiles and things like that. I think another thing that I will say before I wrap it up, there seems to be a lot of strong opinions on this, which are formulated by marketing, where basically a crowd will say, look, we didn't design that bullet for hunting. But I don't believe that's how science works. I believe that the way science works is that when you test, you measure and observe and repeat, that is science. And if you're repeatedly finding from multiple sources that a particular projectile is working well in 99% of situations, I don't care what marketing says, because marketing's just marketing anyway. Marketing's never been an authority, it's more an argument to persuade you into a sale. I think science here is the authority. So that's what's been tested. There's been so much work done, especially by guys like Nathan Foster, who has extensively tested the AMAX or the ELD match. And talking to him, I did ask him about the A-tip, and he made a very, very point. He said, use the A-tip, measure and observe. He said, note the wounds, where the shot placement was, and just get a feel of oh, that didn't work that well. Therefore, I need to be careful using this projectile in this situation. That worked very well. Make a note of that and start building yourself a profile around that projectile of, the 7mm 166 projectile works super, super well on large red stags. but it didn't work well on pigs. And I think that's a good point to make. Measure, observe, repeat. And there you'll get your information about which projectile you should be using.